Add another public health crisis to the toll of the new coronavirus. Mounting data suggests that domestic abuse is acting like an opportunistic infection, flourishing in the conditions created by the pandemic. There was every reason to believe that the restrictions imposed to keep the virus from spreading would have such an effect, said Maureen Hester, a Bristol University sociologist who studies abusive relationships. Domestic violence goes up whenever families spend more time together, such as the Christmas and summer vacations, she said. Now, with families in lockdown worldwide, hotlines are lighting up with abuse reports, leaving governments trying to address a crisis that experts say they should have seen coming. The United Nations called on Sunday for urgent action to combat the worldwide surge in domestic violence. I urge all governments to put women's safety first as they respond to the pandemic, Secretary General Antonio Guterres wrote on Twitter. But governments largely failed to prepare for the way the new public health measures would create opportunities for abusers to terrorize their victims. Now many are scrambling to offer services to those at risk. But, as with the response to the virus itself, the delays mean that irreparable harm may already have occurred. As cities and towns across China locked down, a 26-year-old woman named Lele found herself entangled in more and more arguments with her husband, with whom she now had to spend every hour in their home in Anhui province in eastern China. On March 1st, while Lele was holding her 11-month-old daughter, her husband began to beat her with a high chair. She's not sure how many times he hit her. Eventually, she says, one of her legs lost feeling and she fell to the ground, still holding the baby in her arms. A photograph she took after the incident shows the high chair lying on the floor in pieces, two of its metal legs snapped off, evidence of the force with which her husband wielded it against her. Another image documents Lele's injuries. Nearly every inch of her lower leg were covered in bruises, a huge hematoma blooming on her left calf. Lele, her full name is not being used for her safety, said that her husband had abused her throughout their 6-year relationship, but that the COVID-19 outbreak made things far worse. During the epidemic, we were unable to go outside, and our conflicts just grew bigger and bigger and more frequent, she said. Everything was exposed. As quarantines take effect around the world, that kind of intimate terrorism, a term many experts prefer for domestic violence, is flourishing. In China, a Beijing-based NGO dedicated to combating violence against women, Equality has seen a surge in calls to its helpline since early February, when the government locked down cities in Hubei province, then the outbreak's epicenter. In Spain, the emergency number for domestic violence received 18% more calls in the first 2 weeks of lockdown than in the same period a month earlier. We've been getting some very distressing calls, showing us clearly just how intense psychological as well as physical mistreatment can get when people are kept 24 hours a day together within a reduced space, said Anna Bella, who set up a foundation to help other women after surviving domestic violence herself. On Thursday, the French police reported a nationwide spike of about 30% in domestic violence. Christophe Castaner, the French Interior Minister, said he had asked officers to be on the lookout for abuse. The risk increases due to confinement, he said in an interview on French television. In Spain, with the help of women's associations, the New York Times contacted women stuck at home with an abusive husband or partner and conducted interviews over WhatsApp. One of them, Anna, who asked that her full name be withheld, shares an apartment with her partner and says she has been regularly abusing her. He has been. He insists on total surveillance at all times. If she tries to lock herself in a room, he kicks the door until she opens it. I can't even have privacy in the bathroom, and now I have to endure this in a lockdown, she wrote in a message sent late at night to hide the communication from her husband. In addition to physical violence, which is not present in every abusive relationship, common tools of abuse include isolation from friends, family, and employment, constant surveillance, strict, detailed rules for behavior, and restrictions on access to such basic necessities as food, clothing, and sanitary facilities. Home isolation, however, vital to the fight against the pandemic, is still giving more power to the abuser. Dr. Hester said, if suddenly people got to be at home, that gives him an opportunity suddenly to call the shots around that. to say what she should be doing or what she shouldn't be doing. The isolation has also shattered support networks, making it far more difficult for victims to get help or escape. Spain announced its lockdown on March 14. France began 3 days later. About 2 weeks later, with abuse reports soaring, officials there announced that they too plan to turn vacant hotel rooms into shelters, among other emergency efforts. In Britain, the authorities waited longer before imposing a lockdown. 10 days before it began on March 23rd, the New York Times contacted the Home Office about what it planned to do about domestic violence. The response: only existing sources of advice and support will be available. The government later published a list of hotlines and apps that victims could use to call for help, but only one was specifically tailored for the COVID-19 crisis. By a week into lockdown, Avon and Somerset, in the southwest of the country, said domestic abuse reports were already up by 20%, and local forces elsewhere were bracing for the same. Last week, after dozens of civic groups signed an open letter to the government calling for action, officials pledged to respond without offering specifics. With COVID-19 ravaging the economy, such crises are said to become much more frequent. Let me know about you guys, gals. Anything happening with you in your country and city? Hopefully not. Remember, it's all about peace and love, especially at this time. Try to stay healthy, try to stay safe, and most importantly, protect the family. Peace and love all the time. Vakaga out.